Welcome to 16 weeks of SATs week 13, and this week we're going to be covering percentages. We've had lots of requests for a video on percentages, and lucky for you, we're going to be doing two. So this week we're going to be focusing on basic percentages, and what that means is the foundations of how to calculate percentages. It's not just about being able to find 36%, although I will cover that, but this week we're going to focus on how we find 10%, how we find multiples of 10%, i.e. 20%, 30%, 40%, and also how we find 5%. And then finally, combinations of those. So things like 35%, 45%, 65%. Really, really common. But the key to being able to find and calculate all of those percentages is being able to calculate 10%. And that's what we're going to focus on this week. Okay. In next week's video, at the back end of next week's video, I'm going to put in a more holistic approach to finding percentages, which is a bit of a one-stop shop. It does involve two more complicated strategies, but for this week, we're going to look at how we use place value and finding 10% to calculate different parts of percentages. It's going to help us work out lots of different percentages. And then next week, the sort of hack approach to it of just calculating using do this step, do that step, and you'll be able to find any percentage. We'll cover that next week, as well as finding more complex percentages. So it's a really, really exciting video. My big ask, as I always ask, is to please make sure that you like the videos and you subscribe to the YouTube channel. That helps me make more content. And that's been really effective the last few weeks. So please subscribe to the videos, and it makes a big difference to me. So thanks for getting involved. We're going to get straight into finding percentages. There's quite a lot of content in today's video, starting with 10%, but I'm sure by the end of it, you'll be ready to smash these easy percentages questions and gobble up all those marks that are available with percentages. So let's get stuck into percentages. Now, the key thing with everything in this lesson that we go through, when we get into some of the question examples, I'm going to be running through them quite quickly without going into the deep dive of how to find 10% for everyone. But the key thing in today's lesson is making sure that we can find, as it says up here, 10%. Okay, this is the first step to being successful within finding percentages. So the first thing we need to be able to do is find 10%. And all we need to do to find 10% is divide by 10. So the long way of doing this, which I wouldn't really want to see people doing, is to basically go, right, okay, well, let's find 10% of some different numbers. So the first number, for example, let's just put a number out here and go, right, what is 10% of 210? Well, to find that percentage, what we need to do is divide it by 10. Okay, so we should be able to just know that 210 divided by 10 is 21. The way to do that in terms of place value would be to look at this number and think, right, okay, we've got 210. This is the ones, this is the tens, this is the hundreds, decimal, decimal. This is one, dividing by 10, 100, and 1,000. So you all know how to do dividing by 10, 100, and 1,000. We adjust, don't we, along. So because we're dividing by 10, we would move all of the digits one space to the right. So essentially, that would end up looking like this, wouldn't it? So we've got, basically, forget the fact that we've got nothing in the decimal places. It's just 21. Okay, so 210 divided by 10 is 21. So 21 is 10%. So if we can find 10%, it's very, very easy to find lots and lots of other percentages. And a lot of this is arithmetic done in our head. Now, if you need to write these sort of things down to start with, that's fine. But ideally, when we're finding percentages, we haven't got a huge amount of time and we need to work through this a little bit quicker. So let's look at some examples. But the key thing today, I'm just going to show you again up here, is this. We're going to be finding 10% in nearly every question. Okay, so your ability to find 10%, and the more you find 10%, the more it just becomes obvious what it is, because it is just dividing by 10, which is this here. But ideally, we're doing it in our heads. So again, just some quick arithmetic. I'm not going to be drawing out the ones, tens, hundreds, and everything each time, but we really should, with all these questions, in the SATs, we probably won't get too many that ask for just 10%, but 10% is the foundation. So we need to practice finding 10%. So this example here, again, what is 10% of 27? Well, we should be able to see that 27 divided by 10 would be, that's annoying, would be 2.7. We should be able to look at 10% of 150, which is dividing this number, 150 by 10, which is saying how many 10s are in 150? Well, it's 15, isn't it? Okay, so we're just getting 10 times smaller. And again, the next question, what is 10% of 310? Okay, if we had to go to it, 310, decimal, decimal, move everything along 2 places, then essentially we're going to see that it's 31. It's fairly obvious. So if we divide it by 10 and we've got a hundreds number, that's going to become a tens number. If we've got a thousands number, that's going to become a hundreds number. So again, it's just looking at that place value of hundreds, tens, ones. Let's say we've got thousands. If we've got a thousand number and we divide by 10, it's going to become a hundreds number. If we've got a hundreds number like here, 310, and we divide it by 10, it's going to become a tens number like it did here. If we've got a tens number, so if we had 31 and we wanted to find 10% of 31, we're going to become a ones number. So 31 would become 3.1. Okay, so it's very logical and it's very predictable what these numbers are going to be. So again, if we look over at the next question, what's 10% of 270? We're just dividing by 10. You should be able to see that it's 27. But again, to prove it, we've got 270.0, put our decimal in, everything's going to move one place to the right. So essentially we've got 27. And again, if we were to divide by 10 again, you would get 2.7. And if you were to divide by 10 again, you would get 0.27. And if you were to divide by 10 again, you get 0.027. So we can all, dividing by 10 is very, very easy. It's just moving each of the digits along place value to the right so they become 10 times smaller, which is just divided by 10. So finding 10% should be really easy to do, and you can do that with lots and lots of numbers. So again, just some further examples, and again, if I was to just do the process of 36.0, put the decimal below and move everything along one space to the right, we've got 3.6. Okay, it's that simple, and again, that hasn't took too long to do. So even if you had to do that, it's very simple to find 10% of 36. It's 3.6. If you had 3,100 and you put your decimals in so that we can adjust things along, we've got 3, 1, 0, 0. So essentially that's 310. But that makes sense. We've took a 1,000 number. It's now become a 100 number because we've divided by 10. Again, the next one, we've got 147. Okay, 0.0. Let's move everything one space to the right. So we've got, should be able to see 14.7. And again, with the final number, we should just be able to see, well, it's a 1,000 number. If I reduce everything down, divided by 10, it's going to become 127. But let's just see that. So we've got 1,270. Okay, move everything one space to the right. So we've got 1, 2, 7, 0. So essentially, it's 127. So finding 10% is very, very easy, but it is something that we must practice doing. Now, this is where finding 10% starts to become really important, because these types of questions where we are finding 20%, 30%, 40%, whatever it may be, these question types, so I'll just highlight these up. That's annoying once again. Once we start to find these, finding 10% is the foundation of that. Percentages is just sometimes trying to find the logical process of getting there. And we can't just find 30% instantly. What we need to do first is find 10%. Then once we've found 10%, it's really easy to find 20 and 30%. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing that we're going to look to do is, again, if we're finding 20% of 360, the first thing that I would look to do is I would look to find 10% really quickly. And if I need to make a jotting, then I'll do that. So I'm going to adjust everything along one place value divided by 10. So I know that 10% is equal to 36. So if I know what 10% is, then finding 20%, which is just double 10%, is just doubling, isn't it? It's timesing by 2. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to times 36 by 2, and that will give me 20%. And again, you should be able to do that in your head and know that it's 72. But if you needed to do a quick multiplication and do 36 times 2 in your arithmetic, then that's absolutely fine. So you would do 2 times 6, which is 12, carry the 1, and then 2 times 3 is 6, add the 1 is 7. So you would get 72. But ultimately, you've reached your answer very, very quickly by finding 10% and then doubling it to get 20%. Very simple, very effective. And you can do that every single time. So again, 20% of 240. We'll make a quick note, 240, divide by 10, so everything that moves along one place value. So we're left with 24. So 24 is 10% of that number. So to find 20%, we're just going to double it. And I know all of you will be able to see that that's 48. But again, if you really needed to do a multiplication, you could just do 24 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 2 is 4. So you would get that answer, and you would get 20% of 240 very, very quickly. Now, again, finding 30% is just the same. The only difference is we would find 10% and then times by 3, because 10 times 3 is 30. Okay, so 10% times 3 is going to be 30%. So that's how we can make 30% very simply. And again, let's have a look. So again, if we've got 900, first thing that I want to do is that I want to find 10%. So I've got 900. Everything gets moved along one space to the right because we're divided by 10. So that gives us 90. Very simple. And now, again, I'm going to use my times table facts. I need to times 90 by 3. Well, I know what 9 times 3 is. That's 270. So 90 times 3 is going to be 270. And again, if you needed to do so, 90 times 3, which again, you shouldn't need to do this. You've got multiplication facts in your head. But 3 times 0 is 0. 9 times 3 is 27. Okay, so we've got 270. So very quickly, 30% of 900, we found that by finding 10%, and then we've times it by 3 to find 270. So the answer would be 270. And then again, 30% again is just finding 10% and times it by 3. So on this next one, we've got 740. So 740, decimal, decimal. Move everything one space to the right. That gives me my 10%, which is 74. And then I'm going to do 74 times 3. Now, in my head, we could do 70 times 3, which is 210, and 4 times 3, which is 12, and add them together. Or you might just want to just quickly go into a short multiplication and just go, right, I'll just do 74 times 3. Very simple. 4 times 3 is 12, carry the 1. 3 times 7 is 21, add the 1 is 22. Okay, so we've got a nice even number of 222. But that's a really, really simple way of finding 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s, 80%. Okay, so, and again, if you were trying to find 60%, you would times by 6. If you were finding 70%, you would times by 7. But it all comes back to that ability of finding 10%. You must be able to find 10% and then multiply to find percentages like these that are multiples of 10. Okay, multiples of 10. Very simple. So again, we can just continue to do more of these. Very straightforward. So again, if we had a question, what is 20% of 410? Hopefully you can see that it's 41. That would be the best case scenario. But if you quickly need to make this jotting, 410, decimal, decimal. And again, everything moves along one column to the right. Now, ideally, obviously, my squares are quite large. Each of these digits, when you're doing these, would be in their own square. Okay, otherwise you're going to make a mistake. All right. So everything should be columned off really, really straightforward. And when we've gone through this in lots of the other videos. So again, we've got 41. We should be able to double that quite quickly and just see that that's going to be 82. Okay. So 20% is 82. Very simple. And again, that's quite nice because the next question is 82. So what is 20% of 82? Well, we need to find 10% first. So if we've got 82, everything's going to move along and we end up with 8.2, which again makes sense. So we should just be able to double that. So we should have 16.4. But again, if we need to do a decimal multiplication, which for me, I think that's more complicated. So we should just be able to see that 8 times 2 is 16 and 0.2 is 0.4. So we've got 16.4. But again, if you needed to do it, which again, I think is complicating the matter. So we've got 8.2 times 2. So we've got 2 times 2 is 4. And then 2 times 8, just move everything back, is 16. Okay. So again, we've got 16.4, but I think moving it that, unless you're really confident with decimal multiplication, I don't think this strategy is where you should be going. Ideally, you should just be able to double 8.2. All right. So the next one, again, 30. What is 30% of 420? So again, I see 30% as a multiple of 10. So the first thing that I'm doing is 420. And again, you should be able to see that it's 42. All right. So 42 is 10%. So I'm going to, now because it's 30%, I'm going to times that by 3. So again, if you need to nip into a quick short multiplication of 42 times 3, that's absolutely fine. 3 times 2 is 6. 4 times 3 is 12. So we've got 126. So we've got the answer very quickly. 30% of 420 is 126. All right. Very simple. Very, very easy. And again, now we jump over 40%. 40% of 360. So again, 360, that's going to be 36. And I need to times that by 4. All right, so again, 36 times 4, because I need 40%. I've only got 10%. 6 times 4 is 24. Carry the 2. And then 4 times 3 is 12. Add the 2 is 14. Okay, so very quickly, we've got 144. And that makes sense. It's very simple. But again, I'll reiterate this. This all comes back to finding 10%, finding 10%, finding 10%, finding 10%, and then multiplying depending on the multiple of 10 that we've got. Okay? Times by 3, times by 4, times by 2, times by 2. So percentages, again, very simple. Very, very simple. And again, let's just illustrate the point further. So again, let's just dive straight into these. So we've got 140. So again, find 10%. 140 is going to be 14. All right. I need to times that by 6 now to get 60%. So I'm going to do 14 times 6. 6 times 4 is 24. Carry the 2. 6 times 1 is 6. Add the 2 is 8. So I've got 84. Very simply, job done. And you can see how quickly I'm going through these questions. I'm getting the mark very quickly. Again, 80% of 202. This one's going to be a little bit more complex because I'm going to end up with a decimal number. So 202. And again, this is probably unlikely as a SATs question because of the complexity. So we've got 20.2 as 10%. Now I need to times that by 8. So I've got 20.2 times 8. So again, I'm just going to get my ruler just to draw a bit of a straighter line. There we go. So again, decimal would be in the same column. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 0 is 0. Add the 1 is 1. And then 8 times 2 is 16. So I'm going to end up with 161.6. And again, as I've said previously, my squares are a little bit big on here so that it's just a bit more visible. But each of these, you know, again, if you're not sure on decimal multiplication, there's a video that I've produced already, and it all comes back to laying out our decimals in the same column. Okay, once we've done that, we have that really effective structure to be able to go and just multiply like we normally would. And again, this one's going to be another example of it. 70% of 148. So again, 70%, we need to find 10% first. So 148, that quick note, everything moves along one column to the right because we're dividing by 10. So I've got 14.8, and I'm going to need to multiply that by 7. So I've got 14.8 multiplied by 7. Yeah, just get my ruler again. There we go. So 8 times 7 is 56. So 6 is going to go there, and the 5 is going to get carried. 7 times 4 is 28. Add the 5 is 33. And then 7 times 1 is 7. Add the 3 is 10. So we've got 103.6. But again, I think the likelihood of getting that question, you may get that sort of question. It would come up later on in the test. And yeah, it's a little bit trickier. And then finally, we've got 50% of 214. Now, the key here, the reason why I put this one in is because, as I've said at the start, percentages are questions where there are a variety of ways to solve percentages questions, okay? This is just one example. Or the finding 10% is just one example and one way to do it. I think it's very simple because it relies on place value, which you've all been taught. Now, the key part here with questions like 50% is not to get caught out in autopilot, okay? And because for this one, you don't need to find, you can find 10% and then times it by 5. Absolutely. But let's remember, 50% is just half, okay? So if you get a question that says, what is 50% of 214? Well, it's just half, okay? So half of 214 is 107. So the answer, without having to do any working out, because you see a percentages question, it's just 107. Okay, what's half of 200? 100. What's half of 14? 7. So we could, because it's an even number, we can work that out quite quickly. So again, that's just a little bit of a red flag, I suppose, of just to always stay switched on. Just because it's a percentages question, we still need to think and not just go too much into autopilot. Because if we get a question like this, really, we should just be able to do that really simply. We don't need to overcomplicate it. With this one, we do. But with this one, we don't really need to do that. So it's just being aware. So now that we can find 10% and 20 and 30 and 40 and 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 by finding 10%, the next skill to master is finding 5%. All right. So to find 5%, we need to find 10% first. So we're still doing everything that we've been doing before. So 5%, so let's find 10%. So 140 is going to be 14. So we know that. And then if we've got 10%, then 5% is half of 10%, isn't it? Okay. So all that we're going to do is once we've found 10%, is we're just going to half it. And that will give us 5%. So 10% is 14. Is 14. So 5% must be 7. It's just half. So that's a really easy thing to be able to do. All right. So we're just going to practice a few of these. By all means, pause it. But ultimately, finding 5% is just finding 10% and then halving. All right. So again, 420, if we wanted 10%, is going to be 42. So again, if we want 5%, we're just going to half 42. So that would be 21. And again, we don't really want to drop into short divisions. We should just be able to half. All right, so let's not complicate it. Half of 42 is 21, so that's 5%. What's 5% of 86? Well, 86 is going to become 8.6. All right, so that's 10%. So what's half of 8.6? Well, again, if we just look at those numbers logically, we should be able to work out that half of 8 is 4 and half of 6 is 3. So half of 8.6 is just 4.3. Okay, that's your 5%. Very, very simple. And again, the final one, 5% of 215. I'm just going to change this one just slightly, just because I don't really think you're going to need to do that. You might not have been able to see me change that. But let's just say 5% of 120. Okay, just for argument's sake. So again, we would find 10%. So again, 120. So that's going to become 12. Okay. Now we've found the 10%. To find 5%, we're just going to half. So half of 12 is 6. All right. So finding 5% is relatively easy. And we need to be able to find 5% for more challenging questions that are going to crop up. And that is these type of questions. So we're only going to run through 2 of them, and I've got some example questions for you to have a go at. But ultimately, finding percentages boils down to this. Now, the key thing to note here is with these numbers is understanding what these numbers are made up of. So 35%, when we're looking at it, we really want to be able to see 30% and 5%, okay? Because we know how to find both of those things. The same in the other number, 45 over here, 45%. Well, we can't just find 45%. What we really need to think is, well, what's 45% made up of? Well, for us, it's made up of 40%, and it's made up of 5%. Oops, that's a 4. Okay, 45, 35. All right? And we know, we've just been through, the whole video has been through how to find these and how to find that. How to find these and how to find that. All right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to find 30% and 5% and then just add them together. All right? So that's how we solve these problems. Let's have a go. So 30%, 35% of 710. So the first thing I'm going to do, again, and this is, you must make notes as you go, otherwise you're going to try to hold a lot of information in your head. So I would just advise doing this. So 10%, we've got 710. Just going to rub that out because I've written it wrong. 710. So we know that 10% is 71. All right, so I've got that. So I'm going to find 30% now by timesing that by 3. So I'm going to do 71 times 3. And this is the process that you'll have to go through. You're going to have to do a few calculations. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 7 is 21. So I know that that's 213. And I'm going to need that in a little while because that's my 30%. And now I need to find 5%. So I've already found 10% over here. So I need to half 71. Okay. So we should be able to work out, if we didn't know this, again, the SATs questions normally work them out so you don't end up with super awkward numbers. All right. But half of 71 is 35.5. All right. So again, if I'd made a better example, we wouldn't be in like an awkward situation like this. You wouldn't probably be expected to have to half 71. But essentially, we're in a situation now where we've got the 2 parts. We've got the 30% here. Just make a note. This is my 30%. And this is my 5%. So all I need to do is add them up together. So I'm going to do that. So I've got 213 add 35.5. Okay, very simple. Just get my ruler out. And again, I'm doing this in small space. You would be absolutely using all of your squared paper. And we can just add that up then. So we've got 5, we've got 8, we've got 4, and we've got 2. So we would get 248.5. Very simple, very effective. And again, you have to go through a little bit of working out. That's just the process with this. And the next one, 45% of 360. So I need to find 40%. So 360. So I know I've got 36 is my 10%. So I'm going to times that by 4. So 36 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Carry the 2. 4 times 3 is 12. Add the 2 is 14. So we've got 144. So 40% is 144. And I don't want to forget that's over here. And then I need to find 5%. So I've got my 10% here. So I just need a half 36 to find 5%. So half of 36 is 18. I just know that that's 18. So that's simple. So at this point, I've got my 5%. I've got my 40%. I just need to add them together. So I would do 144, add 18. Let's quickly get the ruler out. There we go. and I would add them up. So I've got 12, I've got 4 add 1 is 5, add the 1 is 6, and then the 1 is going to drop down. So I'm left with 162. But you can see how I've got to 100, or I've reached 162 as my answer, as 45% of 360, really quickly by just being able to find 10%, which is this. This is the key component, multiplying it, finding 5%, and then adding it together to get to the answer. Okay, so it might seem complicated to start with, but it's about being willing to go through the process. Find 10%. From 10%, you can find things like 5% and 20 and 30, and then we can add them together. Okay, so it's a little bit like, I suppose, Lego in terms of building the bricks. Okay, we need the individual bricks to build the wall. All right, so think of it like that. So in these SATs examples, feel free to pause them as and when you need to, and I'm just going to run through them really quickly. All right, so again, 20%. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into finding my 10%. So I do that all the time. I've got my 1,200. I'm just going to change the color. So 1,200. And again, this is me referencing how I would definitely be using the squares. So from there, I'm at 120 is my 10%. I've made a little note. So now I know that 120 is 10%. I just need to double it. So you should know that that's 240. That would go in there. But if you needed to double it, 120 times 2. Again, 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 1. Sorry, it's 2. Okay, so we've got 240. And again, you can see, I've gone into this process and made a little mistake because it is so easy. All right, I've then corrected myself. But we should just be able to know that 120 doubled is 240. And again, that comes back to our known fact of knowing, well, I might not be able to double 120, but I can definitely double 12. So double 12 is 24. So double 120 must be 240. And then the key part is making sure that we write that answer into the answer box. Otherwise, we will not get the mark. And again, straight away here, what we should be thinking, if I just make a note, is we should be thinking, well, this is really asking me, I'm just going to change the size of my pencil. This is really asking me to find 30% and to find 5%, and then add them together. All right, that's the easiest way to do this. So I've got 320. I've divided by 10, so I know that 32, so I might even make a note of that, 10% is equal to 32, just so I know that. So 32, to get 30%, I'm going to need to times that by 3. So I'm going to do 32 times 3. 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9. So I know over here that I've got my 30%. Now again, to find 10%, I'm going to come back here. So because I need to now find 5%. I have 10% here, so I need to half 32. I know half of 32 is 16. So again, I'll just make a note of that so you can see it. 5% is equal to 16. So now I have my 5% and my 30%. Just need to add them together. So I'm just going to do a quick column addition of 96, add 16. Very easy. 6 add 6 is 12. 9 add 1 is 10. Add the 1 is 11. So I'm basically 112. That needs to go in here. 1, 1, 2. And that's the mark. So we can work through that really, really quickly by multiplying, halving, and adding. And again, 15%. 15%, we should just be able to spot that that's 10% and it's 5%. We need to find them and add them together. So the first thing I'm doing is finding 10%. So that's 320. Fantastic. So I'm happy with that. Make a little note, 10%. There we go. All right, so I've got 10%. Now all I need to do is find 5%, which is just halving 320. Again, known facts is we should know what's half of 32. Half of 32 is 16, very simply. So 5% is equal to 160. Half of 320 is 160. So we're now in a position where we've got 320 add 160. That will give us our answer. So I'm going to do 320 add 160. So 0 add 0 is 0. 2 add 6 is 8. 3 add 1 is 4. So that needs to be added. So we've got 480. So again, quite quickly we can, and again, this is question 27. It's in the back end of the paper. And this really, as long as you can find 10%, the hardest bit in this question was probably halving 320. Okay, but that just comes down to being able to do that. If you needed to drop into a short division and do, 320, and remember, finding halving is just dividing by 2 is what I was trying to say. So that would look something like this. I'm not going to go through this, but you could do that if you were confident with short division, and you would have got 160. All right. So again, very simple to solve. And ultimately, that brings us to the end. And my biggest tip with percentages is practice. Okay. Practice doesn't make perfect, but it can make things permanent. The more we practice, the more we can do that. And again, with all of these questions, the key bit, obviously the first set you're going to, but with all of these, you're going to find 10% first. That is step number 1. All right. In these next step, in 5%, you're then going to obviously divide by 2 or half. In these ones, 20%, 40%, you're then going to multiply. And then these ones, you're obviously going to do a little bit of multiplication and a little bit of addition. And you may even have to divide by 2. So again, very straightforward, I think. And the key to percentages, or the problem for percentages, is when you have to try and start finding these, like 35% of 260, but you don't know how to do this. All right. So it's building on the foundations to get us to the more complex questions. Now, there is going to be another video after this one about percentages, which starts to cover the more complex percentage questions like 36%, 72%, and so on. But for today, the key part is to master finding 10%. Master this bit. It's so important. Then move on to finding 5%, or you can do these ones next. It's up to you. 5% is just halving once you've found 10%. These questions are all about multiplying once you've found 10%. And then this, you know what to do. So like I've said, a really important video. There's lots of question types. In the next video as well, there's also going to be a little bit of a strategy at the end that shows you how to find any percentage with just one strategy. But it does involve using quite complex strategies. So ideally, this is the best scenario, is to be able to find and work with different percentages. So the key, as I've started with, and I will finish with, the key is finding 10%. Practice finding 10%, and percentages will be completely easy for you from this video onwards. Well done. So there's a huge amount of content in there, as you've just covered. 10%, all the multiples of 10%, how to find 5%, and then how to find those combinations as well. So there's a huge amount of coverage there in terms of the basic information that we need to find or to learn to master those percentages. And as I said right at the start of the teaching content, finding 10% is that key aspect, okay? So definitely go away and practice how to find 10%. Write a load of different numbers down and just practice finding 10%. Because if we can find 10%, we can basically find any percentage that we want to from there, or at least it makes it so much easier. So thanks for watching this week. I know lots of people wanted a percentages video, so just continue to support the channel by subscribing. You'll see that somewhere here in the corners. And make sure you like those videos and leave comments. There's potentially a few spare weeks at the end of the 16 weeks, so let me know if there's any other content that you'd like me to cover. But thanks for watching this week. Please subscribe to the channel and definitely check out next week's video when it goes live, which is how to work out those more complex percentages questions where we're looking at 27%, 64%, 93% and so on. So those percentages questions are much trickier and we need a few extra steps in there to help us calculate those percentages. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe and I'll see you all next week.